normalized her ties with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. The historic agreements, brokered by the United States, came after a decades-long stalemate between Israel and her Arab neighbors. Israel signed a deal with both the UAE and Bahrain, and the three countries signed a deal together. The agreements were dubbed the Abraham Accords because they unite the children of the three Abrahamic faiths. At the ceremony for the signing of the groundbreaking accords, several leaders of Christians United for Israel were privileged to be in attendance. Tellingly, at the start of the ceremony, over a dozen rockets were launched from Gaza into Israel, wounding 2 Israelis, including a father of 15 who was distributing food to the needy at the time of the attack. Although the rocket attacks showcase that there is much work left to be done in pursuit of peace in the region, it was a historic day, marking a groundbreaking shift in the Middle East.
I know our talking points aren't until later this afternoon, but this next panel is going to inform that conversation and also get you ready for the whole reason why we're in Washington, D.C., your meetings on Tuesday. When we were talking about who could undertake the Herculean task of tackling this subject and moderating this panel, there was only one person that I thought of, and that's my friend. I call him Gabe. Gabriel Groisman is an attorney, the former mayor of Bal Harbour, Florida, government affairs consultant, and host of the acclaimed podcast, Standpoint. If you haven't downloaded it, you should. He's spoken to groups around the world on issues related to the Jewish community, anti-Semitism, and the Middle East. After he served as the mayor of Bal Harbour for 6 years, and while there, he advanced the nation's first municipal anti-BDS ordinance in December of 2015. As a city councilman, he was the first in the nation to codify a uniform definition of anti-Semitism in December 2017. He's been doing the work for a while. He is the national chairman of the board of the Children's Tumor Foundation and serves as a board member for the Republican Jewish Coalition and the Friends of the Israeli Defense Forces. Please welcome our panelists and Gabe Groisman.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, we've been sitting backstage watching on these televisions, and what an amazing program CUFI has put together, huh? It's unbelievable. So we're here for about half an hour to discuss a really important and potentially dangerous topic. Not that topics are dangerous, but philosophies, if they're pushed into policies, can become dangerous and risky. But here in this room, we're not afraid to have difficult discussions and important discussions. We can't be afraid of these important topics, because if we have good, honest dialogue, we can learn and we can actually win, because the best ideas will win in our society. What we're talking about today is the myth of isolationism. Just the general concept which we'll hear about from our panelists, that the United States can really just bury its head in the sand and ignore what's happening around the world, focus on the home front, and everything will be okay. From where I sit, the world is being divided into two in these days. On one side, we have the West, headed up by the United States. We have Israel, Europe, Argentina. We see countries teetering from one to the other. And on the other, we have Iran, China, Russia, and its axis. It's actually a very unique grouping on the other side, but what brings them together is their opposition to the West. That group is focused on attacking the West, like my friend Douglas Murray in his recent book, The War on the West from 2022, laid out, culturally, religiously, politically, and militarily. And from where I sit, for there to be a strong America in this war, if we don't take on the other side of this axis, we'll end up on the bottom, and we must end up on top. And it is America's best interest for there not to be a strong China economically, or a strong Iran and Russia militarily. It is our job to keep America safe here by keeping our enemies weak and our allies strong. These days, with the economy and the way that it is, and inflation higher than it's ever been, we're hearing for the first time in the halls of Congress for many years, not the first time, but the first time in many years, questions being asked over and over. Should we be involved in Israel? Should we be involved in Ukraine? Should we be involved in Latin America? And those questions aren't questions that should scare us. We should take them on, but we should have good answers. And that's why we have our panel here today, to go through some of those issues. So just a quick introduction. We have with us, starting all the way on the right, Rebecca Heinrich, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and the director of the Keystone Defense Initiative. By the way, I'm keeping their bios short so we can get to the substance, but their bios are all incredibly impressive. Next, we have Rich. Thank you. By the way, I heard her doing an interview backstage. Incredible. Next, we have Rich Goldberg, a senior advisor at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, previously served at the White House as a National Security Council staff. And CUFI Action's very own Boris Zilberman, Director of Public Policy and Strategy. So, Dr. Rebecca Heinrich, let's start with you. Can you lay out first, what is the argument for isolationism that we're hearing today?
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's a real privilege to be here with all of you. The main argument that we have seen kind of pop up in Congress is really, it's been there for a while on the American left. And that's that the United States has so many troubles here at home, and that we are resource constrained, and so the United States should turn inward. And by the way, if the United States does get involved abroad, that we tend to make things worse, not better. And that's sort of broad ways to think about it, that's how the argument has been laid out on the left. We've seen that pop up on the American right as well, that the debt is so big, the United States is overstretched, our adversaries are too great, the United States is a nation in decline, and so we should husband our resources and simply let our allies sort of take care of various regions in the world. And my response to that is, we've had a taste of what that looks like with the Biden administration. And if you like the instability, the aggression that our adversaries are deciding makes sense to them because they feel American indecision, Americans at each other's throat domestically, an American government that is risk-averse, that doesn't think it has the moral high ground to lead and to take a clear position. If you like what you see now, you're really going to love isolationism. Because you're going to see adversaries that see the United States in retreat. They see, and by the way, if the United States does not lead our allies, and that does not mean that the United States does it all. Sometimes American leadership means delegating. Sometimes it means tough love to our allies. Sometimes it means, this is what Ronald Reagan did in the Cold War. Ronald Reagan used allies and partners. If you were for your own sovereignty and freedom, it didn't even matter if you were a liberal democracy. You had a friend in the freedom people, which is the United States of America. And so I think that we've really had a nice big dose of a little bit of a preview of what isolationism would look like if it went in its full flowering under the Biden administration. And it has been disastrous, it's created instability, and it will get worse.
Thank you for that. Rich, to many of us, it seems so obvious what Rebecca's saying, right? When America is weak, our adversaries and the bad actors start acting up. It turns out that the president just looking at the camera and saying don't doesn't really do anything, right? So what is causing this new uptick in discussions on isolationism at the policy level?
Well, I think that there's always been a populist thread across the American political spectrum. And we've seen waves of this throughout history on both sides of the aisle. We can go back to the 30s. We can be more recently in the Buchanan era of the 1990s when I was coming of age. We can think about Barack Obama embracing the same type of populist rhetoric, anti-foreign aid rhetoric, in selling his anti-war vision against the Iraq war. Why are we spending money in Iraq when we should be spending money on schools and bridges back home? That was the messaging he used to get elected in 2008. And so this is now being capitalized by people on the far right, far left for whatever they're trying to sell. But their vision ultimately is to sell you into a position of weakness in the world where you're pulling back, you're allowing dictators to occupy wide swaths of the world, which make us less secure, as Rebecca pointed out. They're hoping that you don't know the details. They're hoping you don't think through what comes next. What happens if you let China take Taiwan? What happens if you let Putin march on Eastern Europe? What happens if Iran gets to rule the Middle East with nuclear weapons? And they're hoping you don't know that they're already in our backyard, in Venezuela, in Cuba, in the tri-border area. The IRGC is on the ground, Hezbollah is on the ground, the Russians are on the ground, the Chinese are on the ground, and we have an open border. So this world is not one of thousands of miles away. It's a world where they're coming to our backyard. And we're talking about retreating to our borders. History shows us that when we retreat to our borders, our enemies follow us there, and we're more vulnerable than ever.
Absolutely. I don't know if any of you have seen the show, The Peaky Blinders. I don't know if I should mention that at a Christian event, but it's a great TV show. And they mention, the guy's the head of the right-wing party, and he switches to go to the far left. And his chief of staff says to him, you can't do that. You can't just switch from the far right to the far left. People are not gonna buy it. And he answers him, and of course this is an oversimplification, but it made me think of it as you were speaking, which was, politics is not a straight line, politics is a circle. In the middle, everything is pretty similar. And when you get all the way out to the edges, everything starts looking the same again. And you see it on this isolationist front where you'll see, the Thomas Masseys of the world voting with Rashida Tlaib, right? For example, far opposite ends of the political spectrum, but agreeing on this for totally different reasons. But we are Christians United for Israel event, right? So Boris, as I turn to you as the CUFI action guy, I'm gonna give you an opportunity that I didn't tell you I was gonna give you, which is, can you make the case for why it is in America's interest to support Israel?
No, absolutely. It's great to be with this awesome panel and a wonderful moderator. So just kind of to answer that and to bounce off what both Rebecca and Rich have said, is we can't pick and choose. National security is not an a la carte menu where you can kind of pick the things you want to be involved in and choose other things that you don't want to be involved in, right? They have this strain of isolationism that we were talking about backstage that's, let's just do China and forget about Iran, forget about Russia, let's just do one thing. And it doesn't work that way. And why the US, to get to your question, is very important to back Israel not only in words, and lots of people give words, but also in actions. For those of you that came to the fly-in this spring to support the national security supplemental that became law, those kind of actions are vital because Israel is at the center of a great war, right? Where you have the Iranians involved. The Iranians are encircling them with proxy forces, but that's not all, right? Iran is working with the Russians to use Ukraine as a proving ground for their UAVs. Those same UAVs they're sending to the Houthis. The Houthis are attacking Israel. So not only is the political paradigm in the spectrum a circle, but you really see a circle in this axis when the Chinese are buying Iranian oil, enriching them, right? Since 2021, the Iranians have been able to turn up $80 billion profit selling oil. And so where is that money going for? It's definitely not going for their schools. It's definitely not going for their roads, etc. It's going for Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, and it's going to build drone factories in Russia to attack Ukraine and help the Chinese with other infrastructure issues. So why there's the imperative to support Israel. Morally, it's shared values, shared democracy, our key ally in the Middle East, but there's a broader issue of US security, and that by beating back against those that are trying to destroy Israel, we're not only doing the moral thing, we're also doing the right thing for U.S. security in the short and long term.
Rebecca, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, if I may, you will often hear a counter argument from those who are more inclined to say, look, everything's such a mess, the United States needs to turn inward, Israel can defend itself, our European allies can defend themselves, they've got great economies, they can do it themselves. This is not the United States' war. This is what you'll hear, the counter to that. And my response is always, you misunderstand me. I am not suggesting that the United States should back Israel out of a sense of altruism. The United States of America is stronger when the nation of Israel is strong and secure. And when the support here at home begins to waver for our support and defense of Israel's right to exist, and you start to see a rise of anti-Semitism here at home, you know that the United States of America is sick. And so to the extent that the United States is strong and bipartisan and supportive in Israel's right to exist, in our moral obligation and strategic obligation to make sure that Israel is strong, then you actually see a correlation with the strength of the United States here at home. And so you can go back and forth on cause and effect about what that is, but I do know as a Christian myself that it is a concern for me and my family when I see anti-Semitism allowed to fester here in the United States of America.
I think people don't reflect on their day enough in this country. Reflect on your day, the average American. You got woken up by an alarm on your iPhone, and you realize that that piece of technology was invented in Israel ultimately. You then went to the bathroom to get ready for the day, and maybe you took a pill that was invented in Israel to save your life. You then got into the car to go to work, and you're using all kinds of mapping technology and the stuff in your car, automation, invented in Israel to make your life better. You got to work and you put the television on, you see people burning American flags on television alongside Israeli flags, chanting death to America, death to Israel, and you understand that the people who hate Israel are the people who hate America. And then you see in the news reports that American-made technology, military weapons are helping defend the Jewish state against our shared enemies and adversaries, and doing the job right, defeating our adversaries, and you learn that an American-made stealth jet sold to the state of Israel is able to penetrate the air defense of the Islamic Republic of Iran and get right by their nuclear headquarters, and you know that Xi Jinping is watching, and you know that Vladimir Putin is watching, and the Ayatollah just woke up, and you thank God that we have a partnership between the United States of America and the State of Israel.
That's exactly right, and if you paid attention to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech to the joint session of Congress, the latter part of his speech, he didn't categorize it as such, but if you pay attention, was exactly to make the case for why the U.S. must continue to support Israel. He says that Israel fights for and protects America's interests in the Middle East while keeping American boots off of the ground. He says that Israel jointly develops with the United States some of the best defense technology in the world. He said that Israel provides the United States some of the best military intelligence in its world that keeps Americans safe here. And why that's so important is all of these reasons are the reasons why, when we're talking about Israel in particular, and we'll now go to other parts of the world, because there are other parts of the world, why we should not shy away from the question, why does the U.S. support Israel? In fact, we should push to have that conversation. Because when it comes to Israel, there are plenty of good reasons. And they're historical, and they're religious, and they're biblical, but they're also military and economic and social, because it came out already this week, something that we all already knew. which is that Iran was funding those protests right down the street where they were burning American flags, because it is in their best interest to sow discord in our country here in our home front. So we can't just sit on our hands. So Rebecca, let me go to you. Everyone's talking about Russia and Ukraine. Help us understand from the United States' interest why it's important for, or whether it's important for the United States to be involved at any level with the Russia-Ukraine war.
Sure, and I'm going to tie it right back into everything we've been talking about. So the first thing that's really important when you hear people talking on TV about geopolitics or various instabilities across the regions is try to strip the euphemism down to understand what they're talking about. So when you hear Biden officials talk about the international rules-based order, I like to just say, no, I'm talking about the world post-World War II that our forefathers built with blood and treasure, and that and then after them came the Cold Warriors, who maintained and consolidated and cemented the US-led order. And what that means in concrete terms is a system of alliances built around the idea that nations are sovereign, that nations, not international institutions, not the ICC. The ICC does not tell Americans what is and is not in compliance with international human rights law. You know who set those laws? It was the United States and our allies. And the United States will not submit our own sovereignty under an unelected governing body that's full of anti-Semites. So when I look at, for my children, what I want for my children and my children's children, I want a world in which the United States is the preeminent power, both economically and militarily. Because the strongest power is the one that's not going to be able to influence everything in the world, but it's going to be able to influence things in the world in a way that benefits the American people and our allies. And so right now there is a growing authoritarian axis with the Chinese Communist Party, the Russian Federation, the Iranian regime, and North Korea. And then you have their authoritarian partners throughout the rest of the world that are increasingly being used by these countries to do what? To weaken the United States in our alliances. The United States will remain strong to the extent that we can keep our adversaries at bay and our allies strong so that they can keep conflicts on the lowest levels of violence possible. And the only way you do that is if the United States is strong, can project power abroad, and support our alliances. I don't need to go searching for dragons abroad. You've got the Chinese and the Russians flying bombers near American coasts. We have Hamas supporters right inside the United States. The largest demographic of illegal immigrants coming across the US borders are Chinese nationals. And so in order for the United States to regain stability and be able to move in the world on terms that benefit the American people and our allies, the United States has to be strong, our allies have to be strong, so you want to bolster the Ukrainians' ability not to have a long, protracted war, which is what this administration has permitted the Ukrainians to do, but just to do what we should be doing with the Israelis, give them the weapons, the moral and strategic clarity, diplomatic backing, and operational leeway to destroy their adversaries so they can return to peace.
And adding to that, geopolitics, a lot of it is about signaling. And everything Rebecca said is true, but if the signal that the Iranians, the Chinese get, if the US backs off the support to Ukraine and the Russians take over, is not only, it doesn't stay in Europe, right? There's not only the bad signal in Europe that Putin can go on and do other things in Europe. It's a signal to the Iranians that the US isn't serious. It's the signal to the Chinese on Taiwan that the US isn't serious, because Ukraine started this latest round after the US pulled out of Afghanistan and Putin saw, in the way it was done, that the US is not serious, right? We can push these guys around and we can go into Ukraine, or if you're the Iranians, you can shoot off missiles and rockets at Israel and do all these things, and that the Chinese could do something in Taiwan. And we can't send those signals. We have to be sending the strong signals that saying, if you punch us, we're gonna punch back a heck of a lot harder.
Rich, to dovetail off of something Rebecca said earlier, is when there's American weakness, we see the bad actors really start acting up, and Iran is one of the worst actors that we see today. What can we hope to see if there's a change in the US government in January? I hope that causes a little bit of an applause line here. What are the moves we can hope to see from the United States if there's a change in policy towards Iran to address the daily, if not weekly, if not daily attacks from the Houthis, from Hezbollah's acting up, and of course Hamas, and just Iran generally around the world?
I'm going to take your question and the previous comments, and I'm just going to put them together, and that is we have case study after case study now of how American weakness invites conflict and how American strength as an alternative promotes peace and stability. When you have maximum pressure on the Islamic Republic of Iran and maximum support for the State of Israel, you get an Iran that's almost broke, you get an Iran that freezes any escalation on its nuclear program, you take out one of the world's top terror masterminds in Qasem Soleimani, and you get the Abraham Accords. When you put maximum pressure on Israel, and you put maximum appeasement forward to Iran, you get an 8-front war against the State of Israel, missiles raining down on the Red Sea, terrorism like you've never seen it before, and Iran on the 1-yard line of a nuclear weapons program. What would I do in January? I'd go back to the recipe that works. But remember, we've seen these case studies around the world. What would it have taken? 2,000 troops and getting tough with the Taliban and saying, we won't let you march on Kabul. We won't just evacuate and retreat to Camp David while we see an ally fall to stop Vladimir Putin from taking the lesson and invading Ukraine. How did it work out to relieve sanctions on Venezuela? For anybody who's watching the news, free and fair elections, that worked out well. Now China's moving on the Philippines and Taiwan because we want to promote a climate change deal instead of actually promoting deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. It's not hard. It's not hard to rebut the push towards isolationism from withdrawal from the world because we actually have the proof now. When you're not strong, when you're not there for your allies, the dictators seize and we are weakened.
If I can just... And if I could just encourage you all, as you go to Capitol Hill and you start meeting with different policymakers, if you hear anybody begin to make two points, you can listen for it, you'll hear them say it. Doesn't matter which political party. If anybody begins to make the argument that the reason the Russians have moved in on Ukraine is because of NATO enlargement.
Give them Rebecca's number.
Can I just say that this is the age-old blame America. Jean Kirkpatrick talked about this. This is the blame America, that if you look across, that it's the United States, it's because we support Israel, that all of the poor Gazans have to use sexual violence in order to fight the oppressors, the Israelis. I mean, you hear too many people in senior positions give oxygen to this kind of disgusting, immoral, grotesque argument. So my advice would be, if you hear somebody say that it's something that the United States has done to provoke our adversaries to act aggressively against our allies, that you just respectfully say, no, I don't want to hear that. The United States has not been perfect, but the United States has been a great force for good in this world. And I would say the same thing about Israel. If they begin to make arguments that Israel has done anything to deserve the kind of terrorist activity that it's enduring. Remember, Israel's adversaries do not use human shields in order to prevent Israel from hitting military targets. That's not why they do it. They use human shields in order to maximize human suffering. They want Israel to attack those innocent women and children. They're not doing it so that Israel doesn't do it. They do it so that they do because they have to protect their own people, and then they try to isolate them in the world. So you should gently push back and say, or maybe not so gently, and just say, I reject the argument that the United States of America and our greatest allies are the reason that our adversaries are on the march. They smell weakness, they see it, they see conflict aversion from this White House, they hear constant hand-wringing about escalation. The United States of America should be backing our allies to escalate, to convince the adversaries it will not be worth pursuing their aggressive agenda. Sorry, one more point.
Sure.
Just so you know as a fact that you can present to them as well. To the idea that the Baltic countries, these small 3 Baltic countries, that they're joining NATO in the 90s are a reason that Russia would fear that NATO would be acting aggressively against Russia is so full of baloney. The current Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine that Russia has steamrolled over and has maintained control over is the size of 3 Estonias. If the United States of America does not have a firm grasp of leadership in Europe, Estonia will be gobbled up in just a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
There is one thing that I would say to allow somebody to, maybe blow off some steam on our European allies, and that is, I'm all about defending Europe, and we need to for everything Rebecca just said. But it's about time some Europeans woke up and started defending other allies as well. Because we do not need to stand by while Western Europeans have some kangaroo court to try to prosecute Israeli leaders, democracies for defending themselves. We don't need to sit here while a NATO ally threatens to cut off weapons sales to Israel today in the United Kingdom. There has to be a time of choosing between democracies and dictators. Why is it that we get what the right answer is around the world, but our friends in Europe only seem to know the right answer in their own backyard?
And Rich, to that, we've learned through the 4 years of Trump that actually putting pressure on the Europeans and on these institutions works. The International Criminal Court, when it wanted to investigate the United States and its military for its actions in Afghanistan, the President Trump, put an executive order in place to sanction anyone involved in the investigation or the prosecution of any American. And guess what? The investigation stopped, and the prosecutor resigned. But when that same court started investigating Israel and prosecuting Israel, or starting the process, nothing.
And if I wanted to be really self-reflecting, I'd also say that when you see the President of the United States restart funding for UNRWA to the tune of billions of dollars, and then you see the President of the United States impose sanctions on a democratic ally in Israel through executive order, and then you see the President of the United States himself threaten to withhold weapons from the state of Israel, I'm not that surprised that those democracies over there think they can get away with it too. That's a change I hope comes in January.
That's absolutely right. And there's another NATO ally that we should talk about, one that has gotten no scrutiny from this administration. We talk about non-military means, sanctions, trade embargoes, other things. Turkey. Turkey is a host to senior Hamas officials, financiers. Just yesterday, Erdogan was threatening to attack Israel themselves. They are a country that this administration has done nothing about. There's been no punishment for their role in financing, supporting Hamas terrorists. It's almost a monthly thing where Shin Bet, the Israeli security service, busts a Hamas cell that's being directed out of Turkey. And so that's another NATO ally that the US needs to get tough on, that it is not just about our adversaries, but it's about our frenemies too.
Absolutely, and Erdogan just yesterday threatened to invade Israel, and nothing from the administration here. So we'll close with this. First of all, I want to thank our panelists, because what an incredible panel we've had. Just so everybody understands, this is actually a very complex topic. And these three incredible individuals were able to crystallize such important points for everyone here, me included, to understand it clearly. So thank you all for your efforts.
Thank you.
And I just want to leave you with one word, which is we live in a time when people are afraid of the truth. People are always looking for their truth and your truth and that truth, but there's only one truth. And we can't be afraid to speak it, whether it's about our religion and our God, or whether it's about just truths around the world. And when it comes to isolationism, if you ask me, the question to ask is, do you want America to lead in this next century, or do you want us to follow? Do you want us to be safe, or do you want us to be sitting ducks? We all know what the answers to those questions are. And together with all of your efforts and the efforts of the people here on the stage, I know that great things will happen. Thank you so much.